Now that we have Illustrator open and we have our blank document or blank artboard rather set up, you're going to notice several tools that look similar to what you would see in Photoshop as well as several that are completely new. And just as the case with Photoshop, you definitely want to take the time to play around with Illustrator and play around with the different tools to see what they can do. Illustrator, as you know, is a vector-based program as opposed to a raster-based program. So the interesting thing about Illustrator, in Photoshop, I always told you really had to worry about exactly what size something was and make sure that it was the size that you wanted to output to. In Illustrator, you don't have to worry about that quite as much because a vector program uses a mathematical formula to allow you to scale whatever it is you create infinitely. So I could create something here on my computer that could literally go on the side of a building and it would not end up looking blurry. It wouldn't lose any of that resolution. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's really nice to be able to work that way. And you'll see that I work with Illustrator more often than I do with Photoshop. I still use Photoshop quite a bit, but I definitely work with Illustrator more. You'll see up here at the top, you've got your selection tools, and you'll also notice these little triangles to the bottom right of each or of some of the tools. If you click and hold on that, you're going to notice a little pop-out window, and that'll give you more tools that you can work with. All right, so again, that's something to kind of look at and play around with as you get used to it. The tool that we're going to be working with today, and probably one of the most important tools to get to know, is this pen tool right here. And the pen tool is one of the early tools that's been around in Illustrator from the get-go, but it's still one of the most powerful tools to get to know and to use. Before we get into using that, I do want to show you something that's kind of unique to Illustrator versus Photoshop, and that's your color down here. Now, you're going to notice in Photoshop you had a foreground color and you had a background color, but that's not the case with Illustrator. With Illustrator, you've got a fill and you've got a stroke. So I want to go ahead and change the color of this fill just to kind of show you what it is that I'm talking about, because if it's white, you're not going to see it on this white background. I'm simply going to double click on that and I'm just going to choose a red so that way you see what I'm talking about. Okay? So in Illustrator, I've got my pen tool selected and I've got a red fill and a black stroke. If I click and then click another straight line and then click again, you're going to see I'm getting an image that's filled in with that red. You can't quite see the black stroke on there, so let me make that bigger. And you'll notice when you click on an object, and that's a selectable object now, at the very top, you're going to have all of your options just like you do in Photoshop. And I'm going to take that stroke and I'm just going to make that a little bit larger. And now you can see that I've got a black stroke on a red fill, or with a red fill. Because that's a selectable object, it's not just stuck at that one place on the page. I can actually take it and I can move it around the page, which is really nice. In fact, if I draw another object, so let me go ahead and change this color again. So I'm going to go with blue, and I'm going to change my stroke color. Let's go with this kind of dark pinkish color. If I was to do something like this in Photoshop and put an image on top of another image, I've basically just ruined that back image. Well, in Illustrator, again, it's an individual object, so I can click on that and I can move it right off. Or I can take that one and I can move it back over. I can do whatever it is that I want to do. In fact, let's say I wanted to have that image from the back on top of this one from the front. I can click on that one in the back. I can go to Object. I can go to Arrange, and I could bring it to the front if I want to bring it all the way in front of every single object I have there. Or I could bring forward if I only want to bring it in front of one object. Now, I've only got one other object there, so both of these are going to do the exact same thing. But these are really, really handy ways of layering within a layer. So you can see I brought it forward, and now that object's in front of the other. The other thing you can do, if I click on that object, and again, notice I'm using this selection tool, the black selection tool. If I click on that, I can change the color of this stroke if I want to. So let's go with a greenish color. Or I could change the color of the fill if I wanted to. So we'll go with let's go with this yellow. So again, in Illustrator, you seem to have a lot more control over something once it's created. You'll also notice this other selection tool here is called a direct selection tool. And if I click on that, I can now click on one of these individual points. And as opposed to moving the entire thing, I can click and move that one point around. In fact, if I wanted to, I could even delete a point. Let's say I don't want that one. I just click on it, hit the delete key, and now it's been deleted. But you're going to notice I've broken that path. So if you need to fill that path back in, which you always want to make sure you complete your path, you got to get your pen tool again. You'll notice when I go to the end, I get that little slash mark. And if I click on that now and go back to the end, it'll turn it to a circle. So you see that? Right now I've got nothing next to my pen tool. I go up to that end point, I get a circle, and now that tells me I've got a completed path. So those are a few of the introductory things that you need to know about with the pen tool and the selection tool. So I'm going to go ahead and take both of these and I'm going to delete those. So all I have to do to delete that is click and drag all the way around both of them, hit the delete key, and now they're gone. So let's go back to the pen tool. Now in this newest version of Illustrator, the pen tool has really come a long way, and honestly, it's quite a bit easier to use because of some of the smart guides that are in there versus even CS6. And I'm going to kind of point those out as they pop up. So I've got my pen tool selected. I've got this yellow fill and I've got this green stroke, but I do want to go ahead and bring that stroke down a bit more. So I'm going to put it back to 2 is probably fine. So what you need to know about this is if I click one time and I click again, and by the way, those smart guides, when you see them pop up, that pink one right there, that tells you you're right in the middle of the page, or you're intersecting with whatever the other object is on there. So if I drag it across the page, if I want it to be a perfectly straight line, I hold down Shift, and you'll remember holding Shift from some of the other tools in Photoshop. So if I want a perfectly straight line, I hold Shift and I click, and now I've got a straight line. If I want another straight line, but I want it at a specific angle, I simply move my mouse and I click again. Now, what if I want to curve a line? Well, if I want to curve a line, these are called Bezier curves, and I simply click on it and drag, and now you're going to notice that curve starts to come out. And whenever I'm happy with the curve, I simply let go, and now I've got these handles sitting out here as well as this anchor point. Now, here's one of the nice things about the newer version of Illustrator. We've got these kind of predicted paths that come out. So you can see as I move my pen tool around, it kind of predicts where that path is going to go. So it's telling me right now, if I want to continue that line on a smooth arc, it's going to go to right here. So if I just want to do that, I can click and hold, or I can click and let go. And now I've got that arc going all the way through. And in fact, you can see that line is continuing through there. I'm going to undo that by by holding Control and hitting Z. So that's my undo. Because what if I wanted that path to go back in here? Well, you can see that there's no way to do that right now because it's trying to really pull that back out there. It's trying to create a smooth line. So if I wanted to have a hard line on there, or a hard edge, I can simply click on that anchor. It's broken that other handle out, and now I can go back. So if I click and drag there, I can now start to get those sharper points. All right, and again, to finish my path out, I can go all the way back to that. You'll also notice with that direct selection tool that you can go in and you can change the angle and width and everything else of your paths once you have selected them. So if I wanted to click on that handle, let's say I wanted to come out further, I can do that. All right, if I wanted to move that point around, I can do that as well. So those are a few things to kind of keep in mind. So one thing that I always have my students do, or I try to have them do early on, they'll go through and they'll really start kind of playing with the pen tool and making sure that they understand how to go through, how to move the objects in front of each other, how to make clean curves. And one thing that probably stumps a lot of students more than anything else is making sure that as you make those curves, that everything looks nice and smooth. You'll see a lot of times where students will try to make a curve and they'll go something like this and they'll think everything is okay. But if you actually zoom in here, you're going to notice that you've got this strange little piece coming out right there. So you always want to figure out what you need to do to make that look smooth. Okay, you never want to have an extra little part because when you print really large, it's going to be really apparent and it's going to show up.